Welcome to video 4 in the Guildford Junior Chess Club series. And in the session this Monday, I tried to develop the idea of endgames and how they might develop from even the opening stage of the game in the current session. And the first position I tackled was the one in front of you, which is in actual fact going to be a study by the ex-world champion Max Euwe. Strong players will recognise that this pawn structure comes directly from the Ruy Lopez exchange variation, and Euwe proved that actually this endgame was a win for white, a theme which underpins the whole opening variation. You know, white goes into the exchange Spanish with his eyes open, knowing that if he can exchange all the pieces, he's going to come to this winning endgame. But how exactly do you win? Well, of course, I let the kids play this out. Some won it with white, some didn't. But in each case, they found the solution when they saw it quite instructive. So let's see what Euwe proposed as the winning method. Well, in general, in endgames of this type, you improve the position of your pieces to the best possible extent before touching the pawns. So it makes sense for white to move his king up into the centre first before pushing any pawns. And black can do nothing. He just moves his king up too. Now white plays f4, activating the majority. And black tries to do the same on the queen side, but finds that he cannot if white plays correctly. All white's got to do is to block the queen side off, and b3 is the key move. Now black can't create any sort of pass pawn there, so he's got to sit and watch as the queen side becomes completely blocked. And it's just a question now of how white gets that pass pawn on the king side. Well, g4 was proposed by Euwe, and now a tricky move, the trickiest move that black can play, is g5, attempting to split up the white majority. And of course, what white shouldn't do here is push on, check, because that allows the black king into e5. And this is undesirable for white, to say the least. So white has an excellent move here. He's got e5, a temporary sacrifice of a pawn, which actually wins the game for him. It's worth noting that if black takes on e5, white simply takes on g5. And the idea of h4, h5, followed by creating the pass pawn, can't be stopped. But what happens if white loses the pawn on e5? Check. And then check. Well, it turns out king e4 is very strong. White has still a majority on the king side, 2-1. He's going to use that to deflect the black king away from his own pawn on e5, and then the white king will march in and gobble up all the queenside pawns. And it really is a very simple process. Here we go. The outside pass pawn is created, the black king is drawn away, and the white king simply invades and gobbles all the pawns. A nice lesson in how to use a pawn majority to your advantage. Right, now we move on. And the next part of the session featured a game in the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. And the game that I wished to feature was from the FIDE World Cup played in Tbilisi in 2017 between Exchange Ruy and Shakira Mamajarov, one of the world's strongest players. Seeing the last example, you begin to wonder why on earth black would ever go into the exchange Spanish when he knows that in the end a lost ending is waiting in the wings. Well, the fact is that black has several advantages in this position. I mean, the first thing is it's quite easy for him to develop his pieces. The bishops can come out, the knight can come out, the queen has also activity. Black can castle on either side. It's very easy for black to develop his pieces. Secondly, black's got the bishop pair. In particular, the light square bishop could prove very useful in a position of this type. And finally, black's just not going to sit there and let the pieces be exchanged, is he? He's going to keep the pieces on, get a complicated middle game going, and fight tooth and nail against this winning endgame that white is hoping for. So it's a complicated struggle. And in general, most grandmasters are very happy to take the black side of the exchange Spanish. Well, Mamajarov played bishop d6 here. I want to just retract for a moment to this position. Now, in the early days of the exchange Spanish, white played d4. And that's a direct attempt to go for the ending after e takes d4, queen takes d4. Black's got nothing better to exchange the queens. And now you would think that white is getting some way towards his goal because he's exchanged the queens off. But it's in general been shown that a move like bishop d7 here, followed by castles on the queen side, gives black very comfortable play. White can develop his pieces, to be sure, but he can't actually activate the kingside pawn majority. Meanwhile, black can gradually bring his bishops into the game. And the lack of success with that variation prompted white to try other moves, such as, for instance, knight c3. That is also an interesting move here. I think white is probably threatening knight takes e5 sooner rather than later. But it's also been shown that black gets good play against knight c3 too, because knight c3 is a little bit inflexible. Hence, going back to the game itself, this is why castles, which Bobby Fischer popularised, has become by far the most common move here. White keeps some options open, in particular the idea of c3 and then d4 in certain circumstances, and sharpens the play. Which brings us back to our game and bishop d6. But of course, that's not the only option for black here. It's interesting, when I suggested 4 options to the kids, I suggested f6, which, as we know, is an options preserving move, protecting the pawn. In general, black is trying to keep options open for this bishop on c8. Will it go to e6? Will it go to g4? He protects his pawn first, and he waits to see what white's going to do. There's Bronstein's move, queen d6, nothing wrong with that. The plan is bishop d7 and castles on the queen side, keeping the queen active, also possible. There's bishop g4. Actually, this was the move the children liked the most, and some were even able to demonstrate h3, h5, and the complications thereafter, which I think was quite impressive. But bishop d6, that has been very popular in English chess over the years. I think the trend towards that move was started by Dave Rumans a long time ago, and then Mark Hebden started to play this move at every opportunity. Mickey Adams has played it quite regularly. It's a decent move, just protecting the pawn and planning the knight to e7. And it's been proven that white's got to take this variation on, so d4 has become the mainline move. Takes, and now queen takes. More or less forcing black to play f6, because white's threatening queen takes g7. And now white played knight c3. Well, again, this is the parting of the ways. If you play this with white, you will know that there are a number of alternatives here. White can play bishop e3. That's not a bad move. White can play knight bd2 here. White can play rook e1 here. White can even play e5 here. But of course, all those moves are a long, long way from the endgame that white desires. It's going to be a complex struggle, and black's going to try and play as actively as he can to offset white's structural advantage. Anyway, knight c3, knight e7, that's the usual square, with black manoeuvring the knight to g6, where it covers important central squares. Later on, black might think about playing f5 to get some sort of an attack going. Knight to d2, bishop e6, and that frustrates white's plan. Because if white plays knight c4 here, that's actually a mistake. Black has bishop takes h2 check. Again, pointed out by the group, and black wins the pawn. King takes h2, queen takes d4, bishop takes d4, and now bishop takes c4. Okay, you could argue that opposite colour bishops are on the board and the extra pawn is doubled, but at the same time, you don't want to be a pawn down, do you? So it's no surprise that white avoids that mistake and plays f4 instead. Mamedyarov drops away. Rook a d1, and black castled. Knight to b3. Well, actually, this is a difficult position to assess. Objectively, I think it's about equal. But most of the kids preferred white, because it seemed as though white has got more activity and better development. But this is a bit of a deceptive position, because if white tries anything too soon, he'll quickly find the bishop pair mows him down. Also, I think the pawn on e4 is something of a target. That is white's problem. And black is getting ready to hit the target with the help of moves like queen e7, which probably prepares rook a d8, which will slightly embarrass the queen. And that is why White drops his queen away. But now bishop b4. Well, this puts white to a test that he actually fails. It's a very complex position, and I think white's getting very worried about the fate of his pawn on e4. And he plays e5, which actually he doesn't need to do. What he should try, I think, is queen d7. I mean, you can argue that this is actually very thematic here. But at the same time, perhaps after bishop takes b3, slightly surprising move, and now bishop d6, it's not so easy for white as it seems, because that rook is trapped. And one idea to win it would be to put the rook on b8 and then to play knight f8. Again, white can fight against this move by playing knight a4. Some interesting complications arise here, with knight b6 coming in. But rook e8, and the game continues with, I think, black probably in the ascendancy. But going back, e5, rook a d8, it's starting now to look pretty good for black. White took on f6, that was his idea, an intermezzo. Could he have just retreated his queen? Well, he can, but then I think black takes the pawn on e5. And if white gets funky with a move like f5, I think black then takes on b3. White takes on g6, and now just bishop to c4. And the bishop pair are really controlling this position. Let's go back to the game. E takes f6. Black's happy to take with the queen. And now the position's opening up, which you feel should favour the bishop pair. Well, white played knight d5. Perhaps this is what he intended to play all along, initiating complications, but they do not favour white, as Mamedyarov is now able to come up with an excellent attacking idea. He takes on d5. By the way, both queens were attacked there. And this bishop is hanging. That's the tactic on which white is relying. But it turns out that black can allow that because he's got knight h4. And this illustrates another important concept in opposite colour bishop middle game positions. To get the initiative, to get the attack, is all important. And white's got a few problems here defending the g2 pawn. When he tried rook d2, black played queen g6. And now we see the problems in graphic relief, don't we? Black's hammering away at g2. And white is really struggling here to prevent ideas such as just simply taking on g2, or maybe a move like knight f3 check, which in this position would win material. So white tried f5. It's worthwhile noting here that the queen is now attacking the knight. Knight takes f5, and this buys white a little bit of time. But of course, it comes at the cost of a pawn. And black can defend that pawn by playing knight d6. Again, enticing white to regain the pawn, which is what white did. But I don't know. Maybe white shouldn't do this. And the problem with it is, although he gets the pawn back, he takes his queen offside. And now black piles in with the excellent move queen e4. This is not a move which Mamedyarov was likely to overlook. Well, threatening mate in one. So white creates a square for his king to run to. Black does the same. Queen tries to get back to defend. And now queen e1 check. White resigned. He resigns because when he plays king h2, I think you'll find that rook f1 is a killer. And now we see the point of h6, in that if white goes for a check, black simply parks his king on h7, and it's perfectly safe. So a session, I think, which showed both sides of a coin. On the one hand, white has got the permanent advantage of the better endgame, but on the other hand, black has got compensating dynamic features about his position, ease of development, the two bishops, which make his position very playable. And, white's got to play incredibly well just to try and get to that endgame. And as we saw here, world-class players are happy to take the black pieces and might even start a devastating attack in the early middle game. So there we are, interesting session. The kids found it interesting, and we move on next week to session 5.